Welcome back to another deep dive.
Great to be here.
This is where we take the source materials you're working with, could be articles, notes, research, and we really dig in.
Yeah, the goal is to help you pull out those key insights, understand what's really important, cut through some of the noise.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, wow, we're looking at a story from South Korea, specifically the town of Pocheon. The materials you've shared, they outline this situation in a township called Gunnae-myeon. And it's a fascinating look at how change can actually happen.
Right. Not the usual top-down approach, but really from the community outwards. Ground-up stuff.
Totally. The sources are mostly articles, some reports maybe focusing on a specific community project there.
Yeah, detailing how they went from, like, a nagging problem to a solution they built themselves.
So our mission today, let's try to unpack how these residents spotted this issue, something neglected, and really took charge.
And what that whole process tells us about local action, community ownership,
Right.
what that actually means on the ground.
Okay, let's start with the problem itself. What was the situation like in these alleys in Gunnae-myeon before things changed?
Well, the sources describe these spots, certain alleys, not just as, a bit messy.
Right.
They were chronic sites for illegal garbage dumping, just ignored, basically.
Chronic. And it wasn't just visual clutter, was it? There was that detail about the smell.
Oh, yeah. That really stood out. A resident, Mr. Kim, he's 58,
Hmm.
he said it was so bad he literally couldn't open his windows. The stench from the garbage was overwhelming.
Wow. That that tells you a lot. It's not just unsightly, it's actively impacting quality of life. Basic things like fresh air.
Exactly. These were corners people just learned to avoid. Neglected, unpleasant places.
So you've got this persistent foul-smelling problem. Seems like something that might just linger. Maybe people complain, but nothing happens.
You'd think so, but the sources make a really big point that the change didn't come from some government decree or big external funding push.
Okay, so how did it start?
It was the residents, specifically a group called the Gunnae-myeon Residents Autonomy Committee.
Ah, so an existing local group, the Residents' Autonomy Committee. What did they do?
It kicked off with something pretty fundamental, a conversation.
Just talking.
Well, structured talking. At their annual residents' general meeting, they all got together,
Okay.
and the residents themselves, they flagged the illegal dumping as, like, a top priority issue for their village.
So they identified it collectively.
Yeah.
They weren't just waiting for someone else to notice or run a survey.
Precisely. They used their own meeting, their own platform, to say, this is a problem we need to tackle.
And did they just identify the problem or?
No, crucially, they also moved towards a solution. They actually voted on what to do.
And what was the decision?
The idea they landed on was pretty inspired, I think. Turn those exact dumping spots
Yeah.
into community flower gardens.
Wow. Okay. So
Yeah.
directly replacing the blight with something positive.
Yeah.
Beauty, even.
Right. A very direct symbolic change.
How did they decide where to start? Were there lots of these spots?
Seems like it. The sources mention a public process for that, too. They didn't just pick randomly.
Okay.
They used workshops, community festivals, places where people are already gathered to get input, do some preliminary voting.
So really involving people at multiple stages.
Yeah, and they worked with the village head council to finalize the list. They ended up selecting 4 specific sites across different villages in the township to begin with.
Makes sense. Ensures buy-in for the specific locations, too.
Exactly. So the community owned the problem, the solution, and the target areas.
Okay. Problem identified, solution chosen, sites selected, all by the residents. What came next? Putting it into action.
Yes, and this is where that participatory element really comes through strongly in the sources.
How so?
They didn't just, allocate funds and hire a landscaping company.
Okay.
The residents themselves did the work. They were the ones picking up the shovels, planting the seedlings.
Literally getting their hands dirty.
Absolutely. Putting in the sweat equity.
And what about local officials? Did they just watch from the sidelines?
No, and that's another interesting detail. The sources mention Mayor Baek Young-hyun and a provincial assemblyman, Yoon Chung-sik.
Yeah.
They actually came out and joined in, planted flowers right alongside the residents.
Really? That's significant.
It is. It shows leadership not just approving, but physically participating, getting that dirt on their hands, as the source material put it, validating the community's effort.
That sends a strong message of partnership, I imagine. So what was the result? What did these alleys look like afterwards?
The change sounds dramatic, from garbage-strewn eyesores to, the sources call them flower paths.
Flower paths, nice.
Yeah, vibrant with color, fragrance, A total transformation.
And the residents' reaction must have been positive.
Overwhelmingly so, according to the reports. Remember Mr. Kim, the man who couldn't open his windows?
Yes, because of the smell.
No, he apparently gets the scent of flowers every morning instead.
That's incredible. Quite the turnaround.
And his quote about it is really telling. He says something like, "Real change is when we decide on our own village's affairs and work together to make it happen."
So for him, the way it happened, the deciding together, the working together is what makes it real change, not just the flowers themselves.
Exactly. It's the process, the agency.
Yeah.
And someone from the Residents' Autonomy Committee echoed that.
Oh, yeah.
They talked about feeling a much greater sense of pride because they chose the agenda themselves at their meeting and then achieved it together.
That makes sense. Ownership breeds pride.
Right. And their stated goal now is to continue to foster a community culture where we solve our own problems. It's about building that capacity, that expectation.
This is, it's a lovely story on its own, but it really functions as a great example of participatory governance, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's almost a textbook case, but, real life.
Yeah.
It's not just consultation. The citizens here were involved from square one. Identifying the issue, picking the solution, doing the implementation, every critical step.
Which is so different from the traditional model, right? Where maybe the government notices a problem, designs a fix, and delivers it.
Completely different. This flips that script. The community is the engine here.
And it seems like the local leadership recognized that shift.
Yes. The sources quote Mayor Bake again. He apparently said, "The era of government making unilateral decisions is over."
Strong statement.
Yeah. He framed this resident-led action, where they set the agenda and acted on it, as the true meaning of local autonomy.
Local autonomy in action, not just in name.
Right. And he connected these small changes driven by residents to building a city of greater happiness.
Interesting. So the implication is that this sense of involvement, of agency, is crucial for overall community well-being, not just fixing the immediate problem.
It seems that way. The officials appear to understand that the process itself builds something valuable. That deep sense of ownership, pride, connection.
Something you probably wouldn't get if the city just came in and planted the flowers, even if they did a great job physically.
Exactly. When you've put your own effort into digging that soil, planting those flowers, your connection is just fundamentally different.
This whole Pocheon example, it's just such a clear illustration. Grassroots action making a real, tangible difference. It really prompts you to think about your own situation, doesn't it?
It really does. You start wondering, what about your own community? Are there those kinds of persistent, maybe overlooked problems? Things that affect daily life but just seem stuck?
Yeah. And how are decisions made where you live? Is there a way for residents to do more than just, say, report a pothole?
Is there room for people to get involved in shaping the solutions, maybe even implementing them, like in Gunnae-myeon?
What structures are there? Or maybe what structures could be there to encourage that kind of direct community power?
Because this story really underscores the potential, right? When people collectively decide, okay, this is our issue and we're going to tackle it, incredible things can happen, things that might seem impossible otherwise.
So just to recap this deep dive, we looked at Pocheon, South Korea, a community facing illegal dumping in alleys.
Right. And instead of waiting, the residents, through their autonomy committee, took charge.
They identified it, decided together to create flower gardens, and then physically built them, with local officials even joining in.
Yeah. Transforming the spaces, sure, but maybe more importantly, building this huge sense of community, pride, and ownership.
It's a fantastic real-world example of participatory governance, citizens as the drivers of change.
From start to finish, conception, decision, implementation.
Which leaves us, and you, with a final thought to maybe chew on.
If residents, just by working together, taking ownership, can turn garbage dumps into flower paths, what potential is lying untapped in your own community?
What local challenge, big or small, could be transformed if people decided to come together and make it their own?